I am Alexandra Morgan, Alex for short, and at 31 years old, I received a court summons from my own parents. Not a birthday card. Not a congratulatory bouquet for buying my first home after 12 years of grinding and saving every penny. A lawsuit. They were actually suing me for purchasing a house with my own hard-earned money, claiming I owed them $500,000. The betrayal cut deep, but nothing prepared me for what I would discover about my family in that courtroom. Before I dive into this nightmare, let me know where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe if you want to hear more stories about family betrayal that will make your jaw drop. Growing up in suburban Chicago, my childhood looked normal from the outside. We lived in a modest two-story home with a neatly trimmed lawn and a white picket fence that my father Richard insisted on maintaining to perfection. My mother Diane worked part-time as a receptionist at a dental office, but primarily dedicated herself to maintaining our home and caring for my brother Jason and me. From the beginning, there was an unspoken hierarchy in our family, and I quickly learned my place. Jason was born 3 years after me, and from the moment he arrived, it became clear that he was the golden child. My father, a mid-level manager at a manufacturing company, had big dreams for the Morgan family legacy, a phrase I heard so often it makes me cringe even now. That legacy, whatever it was supposed to be, was apparently only meant to be carried on by Jason. The first memory I have of recognizing the favoritism was my 7th birthday. I had been begging for a bicycle for months, dropping hints and even cutting out pictures from catalogs. When my birthday arrived, I received a used bike from our neighbor's daughter with a hastily applied coat of purple paint. I was grateful, of course. I was raised to be polite. But just 3 months later, when Jason turned 4, he received a brand new bicycle with training wheels, a helmet, knee pads, and even a little bell. When I asked why Jason got a new bike when I didn't, my father simply said, "Jason needs to build confidence. You're already stubborn enough." This pattern continued throughout our childhood. When I wanted to join the school band, my parents complained about the cost of renting an instrument. Yet they never hesitated to sign Jason up for expensive hockey equipment, replacing it whenever he outgrew it. My mother would shrug apologetically but never contradicted my father. My academic achievements were met with casual acknowledgement. "That's nice, Alexandra," my father would say before changing the subject to Jason's C+ in math, which was cause for celebration because it was improvement. Meanwhile, my straight A's were simply expected. The most glaring disparity came when it was time to discuss college. I discovered during my junior year of high school that while Jason had a robust college fund that would cover any university he chose, my fund consisted of barely enough for 2 semesters at community college. When I confronted my parents, my father was unapologetic. "Jason will need to support a family someday," he explained as if it were obvious. "You'll probably just get married and have your husband take care of you. Besides, you're smart enough to get scholarships." Despite the constant favoritism, I excelled in school. I developed a passion for architecture and design that began as an escape from my family dynamics. I would spend hours in the school library poring over books about famous buildings and drafting my own designs. My art teacher, Mrs. Patterson, recognized my talent and encouraged me to pursue it. "You have a unique eye, Alex," she told me once. "You see potential in spaces that others overlook." Those words stayed with me through the difficult years at home. While my parents attended every one of Jason's hockey games, they missed my art showcase, where I won first prize for a scale model of a sustainable community center. Mrs. Patterson was there, though, and her pride in my work meant more than my parents' absence. By the time I turned 19, I had made a decision. I would become completely independent from my family. I moved out of the house with what little savings I had from my part-time job at a coffee shop and found a tiny apartment with 3 roommates. My parents seemed almost relieved when I announced my plans to move out. My mother gave me a few kitchen items and a set of towels, while my father offered his standard advice. Real life isn't as easy as you think, Alexandra. I enrolled in community college to study architectural design while working full-time. It wasn't the prestigious university experience my brother would later have, but it was mine, paid for with my own money and determination. I was finally free from the constant comparison and subtle put-downs that had been the background noise of my childhood. That first year on my own was tough but liberating. I ate a lot of ramen noodles, worked overtime whenever I could, and studied late into the night. But for the first time, I was in control of my own life. No one was there to tell me my dreams were impractical or that I should settle for less because I was just a girl. Every small victory was mine to celebrate, even if I celebrated alone. Looking back now, I realize that this early independence, though born from pain, was preparing me for the challenges ahead. It taught me self-reliance and perseverance, qualities that would serve me well during the next phase of my life. It also set the stage for the eventual confrontation with my family that I never saw coming, but perhaps should have expected all along. The next 12 years of my life could be summed up in one word: grinding. I was determined to build something for myself, even if it meant sacrificing almost everything in the short term. After community college, I transferred to a state university to complete my bachelor's degree in architectural design. This meant working even more hours to cover the increased tuition. My typical day started at 5 a.m. when I would open the coffee shop, work until 1 p.m., attend classes until 6 p.m., then work as a server at a local restaurant until midnight. Weekends weren't for rest. They were for picking up extra shifts and catching up on assignments. My living situation wasn't much better than my schedule. To save money, I shared a small 2-bedroom apartment with 4 other women. We rotated sleeping arrangements. Some nights I had half a bed, other nights I slept on the couch. Privacy was a luxury none of us could afford. My closet was a plastic tub under a table, and my desk was the kitchen counter during off hours. My diet consisted mainly of employee discount meals from the restaurant, coffee shop leftovers, and the cheapest groceries I could find. Ramen noodles became a staple, occasionally upgraded with an egg or some frozen vegetables when I felt like splurging. New clothes? Not unless absolutely necessary. Most of my wardrobe came from thrift stores or clearance racks. Every paycheck was carefully allocated, 70% to essentials, rent, utilities, food, transportation, 20% to education, and 10% to savings. I tracked every penny in a worn notebook, calculating and recalculating how long it would take to reach financial independence. During this time, I met Zoe Williams at the restaurant where I worked. She was a fellow server with a degree in social work and a heart of gold. Unlike my biological family, Zoe saw my potential and became my emotional rock. She would listen to my dreams of someday designing and owning my own home, never once suggesting they were unrealistic. "You're the most determined person I know, Alex," she would tell me. "If anyone can make it happen, it's you." When I landed my first entry-level position at an architectural firm during my final year of university, Zoe organized a celebration dinner at her apartment. Nothing fancy, just pasta and cheap wine, but it remains one of my fondest memories. While my parents barely acknowledged this milestone, Zoe made a hand-drawn card that read "Future Famous Architect" that I still keep in my desk drawer. My contact with my family during these years was minimal. I would make obligatory appearances at Christmas and occasionally Thanksgiving, where the contrast between my brother's life and mine couldn't be more stark. Jason had graduated from an expensive private university, fully funded by our parents, and was working at a financial firm where our father had connections. He drove a new car, wore designer clothes, and lived in a luxury apartment, all subsidized by our parents. "When are you going to get a real job, Alexandra?" my father would ask at these gatherings, dismissing my position at the architectural firm as just a job. My mother would quietly suggest perhaps I should look into something more stable, like teaching. As if my career choice was a phase I would outgrow, After these visits, I would return to my cramped apartment and grueling schedule with renewed determination. Each dismissive comment became fuel for my ambition. I would prove them wrong, not by arguing, but by succeeding on my own terms. As the years passed, I advanced in my career. From junior designer to project coordinator to associate architect, each promotion came with increased responsibility and slightly better pay. I began building a portfolio of projects and a network of professional contacts. I was no longer just surviving, I was building a foundation for my future. By my late 20s, I had cleared my student loans and was able to move into a small studio apartment on my own. It wasn't much, just 450 square feet with a kitchenette and a bathroom where my knees touched the wall when I sat on the toilet, but it was mine. I furnished it with second-hand items that I refurbished myself, applying the design principles I used at work to maximize the tiny space. The savings account I had started years earlier continued to grow, slowly but steadily. I set up automatic transfers to ensure I wouldn't be tempted to spend the money, treating it as if it didn't exist. I took on freelance design projects on weekends, adding those earnings directly to my house fund. Every raise or bonus went straight to savings rather than upgrading my lifestyle. There were many moments of doubt and exhaustion during these years. Friends from college bought homes, got married, took vacations, all things that seemed out of reach for me. There were nights I cried from sheer fatigue, questioning if all this sacrifice would ever pay off. Zoe would remind me during these low moments that I was building something meaningful, even if it wasn't visible to others yet. The moment I realized all the grinding might actually pay off came unexpectedly. I was reviewing my savings account one evening after a particularly challenging project at work had resulted in a performance bonus. The number on the screen made me do a double take. After 12 years of relentless saving, I had accumulated enough for a substantial down payment on a modest home. I called Zoe immediately, my voice shaking with disbelief. "I think I can actually do this," I told her. "I can buy a house." "I never doubted you for a second," she replied. "Let's start looking." I remember sitting in my tiny apartment that night, unable to sleep from excitement. After years of feeling like I was never enough in my family's eyes, I was about to achieve something significant entirely on my own. What I didn't know then was that this achievement would unleash a family drama I never could have anticipated. The house hunting process began with excitement and anxiety in equal measure. While I had the down payment, I was acutely aware that as a single woman with a decent but not exceptional income, my options would be limited. I worked with a real estate agent named Linda Parker who specialized in first-time homebuyers and understood my constraints. "We need to find you something with good bones," Linda explained during our first meeting. "Something you can improve over time as your budget allows." Every weekend for 2 months, we toured homes in various neighborhoods. Some were well beyond repair, others were in unsafe areas, and many were simply out of my price range. The disappointment after each failed viewing was palpable, but I refused to give up or compromise on my basic requirements: structural integrity, a safe neighborhood, and potential for improvement. Then one Sunday afternoon, Linda called with excitement in her voice. "I have something to show you that just came on the market this morning," she said. "It's a bit of a fixer-upper, but I think it might be perfect for you." The house was a 1930s craftsman-style home in a historical neighborhood that had seen better days, but was slowly being revitalized. As soon as we pulled up to the curb, I felt something I hadn't experienced with any other property: a connection. Despite the peeling paint, overgrown garden, and dated exterior, I could see the potential immediately. Inside, the house needed significant cosmetic updates. The wallpaper was from at least 3 decades ago, the kitchen had avocado green appliances, and the carpet had seen better days. But beneath these surface issues, the house had everything I had dreamed about: original hardwood floors under the carpet, beautiful crown molding, built-in bookshelves, a fireplace with a handcrafted mantel, and large windows that flooded the rooms with natural light. The previous owner was an elderly woman who lived here for 40 years. Linda explained. She passed away, and her children are selling the property as is. As I walked through each room, I could already envision the transformations. Removing the carpet to reveal and restore the hardwood floors, stripping the wallpaper, updating the kitchen while preserving its vintage charm. Turning the overgrown backyard into a peaceful garden retreat. This wasn't just a house, it was a canvas for all the design ideas I had accumulated over the years. The asking price was at the upper limit of my budget, but Linda suggested making an offer slightly below asking with an as-is clause to appeal to the sellers who wanted a quick, uncomplicated sale. To my amazement, they accepted the offer within 24 hours. The night after my offer was accepted, Zoe and I had a celebration dinner at my favorite local restaurant. Nothing fancy. Just burgers and beer, but it felt like the finest meal I'd ever had. We toasted with cheap beer, and Zoe gave me a small houseplant as my first housewarming gift. Every home needs something living in it, she said. This little guy can grow along with your new life. In the whirlwind of inspections, paperwork, and closing procedures, I almost forgot to tell my family about my purchase. It wasn't intentional. We simply weren't close enough for them to be among the first people I thought to share news with. I mentioned it casually during a monthly phone call with my mother, expecting perhaps mild interest or lukewarm congratulations. I bought a house, I said after listening to updates about Jason's recent promotion. Nothing fancy, but it's mine. The closing is next week. There was a long silence on the line, followed by my mother asking for the address in a strange voice. I thought nothing of it and shared the information, even describing some of my renovation plans. She asked few questions and seemed distracted for the remainder of the call. The following day, my father called, something that almost never happened. His voice was tight with barely controlled anger. "What's this about you buying a house on Maple Street?" he demanded without preamble. "Yes, I'm really excited about it," I replied, confused by his tone. "It needs work, but do you have any idea what you've done?" he interrupted. "That house should have been your brother's. You've betrayed this family." Before I could ask what he meant, he hung up. I stared at my phone in confusion, trying to make sense of his reaction. What possible connection could my brother have to a house I found through my real estate agent? I tried calling back, but he didn't answer. My mother's phone went straight to voicemail as well. Despite this unsettling interaction, I proceeded with the closing and officially became a homeowner the following week. Moving in was a surreal experience. After years of living in spaces that never truly belonged to me, I now had 1,800 square feet to call my own. My few possessions looked almost comically sparse in the space. Zoe helped me move in, and together we celebrated with pizza on the floor of what would become my living room. We made plans for painting parties and weekend renovation projects. For the first time in my adult life, I felt a sense of permanence and accomplishment that no one could take away from me. As I began minor renovations, starting with removing the old carpet to reveal the hardwood floors underneath, I made an interesting discovery. Behind a loose piece of baseboard in what would become my home office, I found an old photograph. It showed a young couple standing proudly in front of the house, which looked new and well-maintained in the image. I turned it over and saw writing on the back, "Robert and Eleanor Sullivan, 1937. Something about the woman in the photo seemed vaguely familiar, but I couldn't place why. I set the photo aside as a nice piece of the house's history and continued with my projects. 2 weeks after moving in, I received a letter from an elderly neighbor across the street, welcoming me to the neighborhood. She mentioned that she had lived there since the 1950s and knew all about the house's history. Curious, I invited her over for coffee. "Oh my," she said when she saw the photo I had found. "That's the Sullivans. They built this house in the 30s. Eleanor was such a lovely woman. Her daughter Margaret married and moved away in the 60s, I believe." A chill ran down my spine as I suddenly realized why Eleanor looked familiar. She had my mother's eyes and smile. Margaret was my mother's name. Margaret Morgan? I asked tentatively. The neighbor nodded. Yes, that's right. Margaret Sullivan became Margaret Morgan when she married. They had a daughter. That would be you, I suppose, and later a son. I lost touch with them after they moved to the suburbs. As the neighbor continued chatting, my mind was racing. This house had once belonged to my maternal grandparents. My mother had grown up here. But why hadn't she ever mentioned it? And why would my father claim the house should have been my brother's? I was about to find out, and the answer would shake the foundation of everything I thought I knew about my family. 3 weeks after moving into my new home, I was at work reviewing blueprints for a commercial renovation project when my phone rang. The receptionist informed me that a courier had a delivery requiring my signature. Assuming it was work-related documents, I headed to the lobby. The courier handed me a large envelope and asked for my ID before I could sign. Once he confirmed my identity, he nodded solemnly and left without the usual pleasantries. Standing alone in the lobby, I opened the envelope and felt my stomach drop as I read the first page. Summons for civil action. Plaintiffs: Richard Morgan and Diane Morgan. Defendant: Alexandra Morgan. My own parents were suing me. The allegations were so absurd I initially thought it must be some elaborate mistake. They claimed that I had knowingly and maliciously purchased a property that was intended for family inheritance, and that I had used family funds to do so. They were demanding either the transfer of the property deed to Jason or compensation of $500,000, far more than I had paid for the house. I sank into a lobby chair, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the papers. How could they possibly claim my hard-earned money was family funds when they had barely contributed to my education, let alone my adult life? And what family inheritance were they referring to? The house had been on the open market, sold by strangers. I called Zoe from the lobby, barely able to form coherent sentences as I explained what had happened. I'll be right there, she said without hesitation. Don't talk to anyone about this. We need to get you a lawyer immediately. Within an hour, Zoe had picked me up from work and driven me to her cousin Melissa Turner's law office. Melissa specialized in family law and real estate disputes, and Zoe had already briefed her on the situation. This is one of the more unusual cases I've heard, Melissa admitted after reviewing the documents. But unfortunately, family disputes over property can get incredibly messy and irrational. She explained that while the case seemed to have little legal merit, I would need to mount a proper defense. The fact that my parents had hired a well-known law firm suggested they were serious about pursuing this to the fullest extent. What I don't understand is why, I said, fighting back tears of confusion and betrayal. The house was listed on the open market. I worked and saved for 12 years. How can they possibly claim any right to it? Melissa suggested we start by researching the property's history thoroughly. She sent a paralegal to the county records office while we continued discussing the case. By evening, we had assembled a clearer picture of the situation. The house had indeed belonged to my maternal grandparents, Robert and Eleanor Sullivan, from 1937 until Eleanor's death in 1985. Robert had passed away years earlier. According to the will, the property was left to my mother, but she and my father had sold it shortly after inheriting it. The house had changed hands 3 times since then before being purchased by the elderly woman whose estate had recently sold it to me. There's no legal inheritance claim here, Melissa confirmed. They sold the property nearly 40 years ago, relinquishing any legal right to it. But that still didn't explain why my parents believed Jason was entitled to the house. The answer came that evening in the form of an unexpected phone call from my brother. Alex, I had no idea Dad and Mom were going to do this, Jason said, sounding genuinely distressed. I tried to talk them out of it, but Dad is obsessed. Jason, what is going on? Why do they think you should have this house? He sighed heavily. Apparently, Dad has been tracking that house for years. He had some kind of verbal agreement with the previous owner's son that he'd be notified if it ever went on the market. He missed the notification somehow, and when he found out you bought it, he lost his mind. But why? Why is this house so important? Dad always told me that Grandpa Sullivan's house would someday be mine, part of the Morgan legacy he's always talking about. He said it was my birthright as the male heir or some archaic nonsense. I never took it seriously, but apparently he did. I was stunned into silence. All these years. My father had been planning to buy back my mother's childhood home, not for her, but for Jason. Meanwhile, I had inadvertently purchased it without even knowing its connection to our family. I'm sorry, Alex, Jason continued. I told Dad this is crazy. You bought the house fair and square with your own money. But he's convinced you did this deliberately to spite him. After hanging up with Jason, I spent a sleepless night pacing the floors of the house that had unexpectedly become the center of a family war. Every creak of the old floorboards, every shadow cast by the moonlight through the original windows now seemed to hold secrets about my family that I had never known. Over the next few days, I received multiple calls from unknown numbers, my parents trying to reach me from different phones after I blocked their numbers. I let them all go to voicemail, following Melissa's advice not to engage directly. The messages ranged from my father's cold legal threats to my mother's tearful pleas to make things right for the family. The court date was set for 6 weeks away. As the days passed, my initial shock gave way to a deep, simmering anger. The house that should have represented my independence and achievement had become a battleground for family dysfunction that had been festering for decades. Each night, I would sit in the bay window of what was once my grandparents' living room, looking out at the neighborhood they had chosen to raise their family in. I wondered if they ever imagined their home would one day tear that family apart. Or perhaps, as I was beginning to suspect, the fractures had been there all along, hidden beneath the surface of our seemingly normal family life. 2 weeks before the court date, Melissa arranged a pretrial meeting with my parents' attorney. Such meetings are standard practice to see if a settlement can be reached before proceeding to court. Despite my reluctance to face my parents, Melissa advised that my presence would show strength and conviction. The meeting was scheduled at Melissa's office, a renovated Victorian home in the business district. I arrived early, my stomach in knots. Melissa squeezed my shoulder reassuringly as we waited in the conference room. Remember, you've done nothing wrong, she reminded me. We have all the documentation to prove your purchase was legitimate and with your own funds. Stay calm and let me do most of the talking. When my parents arrived with their attorney, a stern-looking man named Lawrence Bennett, the tension in the room was palpable. My mother avoided eye contact, while my father's face was set in the disapproving expression I knew all too well. Jason had declined to attend, telling me privately that he wanted no part in what he called Dad's crusade. After introductions, Lawrence began outlining their position. That there had been a family understanding about the property, that I had deliberately interfered with family plans, and that the funds I used for the purchase were derived from family support, a claim so ridiculous I almost laughed out loud. Melissa calmly presented our evidence. My complete financial records showing every dollar earned and saved over 12 years, tax returns demonstrating my independent status since age 19. And the property records showing the house had changed hands multiple times and been on the open market. My father, growing visibly frustrated as Melissa dismantled their claims, suddenly interrupted. This isn't about paperwork, he snapped. This is about family loyalty and respecting plans that were in place long before Alexandra decided to interfere. Mr. Morgan. Melissa replied evenly, unless those plans were formalized in a contract or legal agreement, they have no bearing on this case. That's when my father turned to me directly. His face flushed with anger. You were never meant to be successful on your own, he said, his voice cold. Women in this family support the men. Your mother understood that. You were supposed to get married, have children, and let your brother carry on the family name and business. Instead, you've been competing with him since childhood. The room fell silent. My mother stared at her hands, not contradicting his statement. Lawrence Bennett looked uncomfortable but said nothing. Melissa watched me carefully, ready to intervene. I took a deep breath, determined not to let my voice shake. I wasn't competing with Jason. I was trying to exist, to be seen, to matter in our family. My father scoffed. This little independent act has gone far enough. Sign the house over to your brother where it belongs, and we can put this behind us. That won't be happening, Melissa interjected firmly. And I suggest we continue this discussion in court, where a judge can evaluate the legal merits of your claim, or lack thereof. As we prepared to leave, my mother finally spoke. Her voice barely above a whisper. Alexandra, please. This house means so much to the family. Don't force us to do this the hard way. Looking into her pleading eyes, I realized something profound. She wasn't being coerced by my father. She was a willing participant in this dynamic and always had been. The hard way was working 3 jobs while going to school, I replied quietly. The hard way was watching my brother get everything handed to him while I fought for scraps. This isn't hard for me, Mom. This is just another Tuesday. In the days following the failed meeting, Melissa's paralegal made a startling discovery during the legal discovery process. Among the documents my parents' lawyer was required to provide were emails between my father and my former high school guidance counselor. In them, my father had actively discouraged the counselor from recommending me for a prestigious scholarship, claiming it would distract Alexandra from her family obligations. There was also documentation of a trust established by my maternal grandmother before her death, a trust that was supposed to be divided equally between Jason and me for education. The records showed that my parents had redirected my portion to Jason's account after convincing the trustee that I had other financial support. Most disturbing were emails to various family members over the years, explaining my absence at family gatherings by claiming I had declined invitations when in reality I had never received them. This goes beyond favoritism, Melissa said grimly as we reviewed the documents. This was systematic sabotage of your opportunities and relationships. The evidence painted a clear picture. My parents had been actively undermining me for most of my life while cultivating Jason as the golden child who would fulfill their vision of family success. As if the universe knew I needed an ally. Jason called me that evening. I found something you should see, he said. Can we meet somewhere private? We arranged to meet at a quiet coffee shop near my office. Jason arrived looking nervous, carrying a manila envelope. I went through Dad's home office while they were out, he explained, sliding the envelope across the table. I've suspected for years that things weren't right between you and them, but I never knew how bad it was until this lawsuit started. Inside the envelope were more documents. A journal my father had kept detailing his legacy plan, old property records for my grandparents' house, and most surprisingly, a letter from my grandmother to me that had never been delivered. Dated shortly before her death, it expressed her pride in my independence and determination, qualities she said reminded her of herself in her youth. There's more, Jason said, his voice heavy with guilt. Dad has been telling me since I was a teenager that I needed to take care of you eventually. That you wouldn't be able to succeed on your own because you're too emotional like all women. He made it seem like looking out for you was my responsibility because you couldn't handle adult life. And you believed him? I asked, hurt despite myself. I did when I was younger, he admitted. But as we got older and I saw how hard you worked, how determined you were, I started questioning everything he told me. This lawsuit was the last straw. I can't be part of this anymore. We sat in silence for a moment. 2 adults coming to terms with the toxic family dynamic we had been raised in. I'll testify for you if it comes to that, Jason finally said. I want to make this right. As I drove home that evening, The weight of these revelations pressed heavily on my chest. The house that had represented freedom and achievement to me held a much darker significance in my family's history. It wasn't just a building my father wanted to control, it was a symbol of his determination to keep me in the subservient role he had always envisioned for me. For the first time since receiving the summons, I felt a strange sense of clarity. This court case wasn't really about the house. It was about my right to define my own life, to break free from the constraints my parents had tried to place on me. And no matter what happened in court, I had already won that battle by building a life on my own terms. The morning of the court date arrived with a clarity I hadn't felt since this ordeal began. As Melissa and I walked up the courthouse steps, she gave me a final pep talk. Remember, stick to the facts. Don't let emotion overwhelm you, even if they try to provoke a reaction. The judge will be looking at the legal merits of the case, not family drama. The courtroom was smaller than I had imagined from television shows, with worn wooden benches and fluorescent lighting that cast everyone in an unflattering pallor. My parents sat on the opposite side with Lawrence Bennett. My mother looked as if she hadn't slept in days, while my father maintained his usual stoic expression. To my surprise, Jason sat in the back row, nodding slightly when our eyes met. Judge Patricia Harris, a stern-looking woman in her 60s, called the court to order promptly at 9 a.m. After stating the case number and names of the parties involved, she looked over her reading glasses at both legal teams. "I've reviewed the filings in this case," she began. "And I must say I find the claims unusual. Mr. Bennett, please present your client's case." Lawrence Bennett approached the podium with confident strides. For the next 30 minutes, he wove a narrative about family tradition, verbal agreements, and moral obligations. He described my parents as devoted caretakers who had supported me throughout my life, only to be betrayed when I purchased a family property that was intended for my brother. "Your Honor, this house has deep significance for the Morgan family," Bennett explained. "It was always understood that if it ever became available, it would be purchased for the male heir to continue the family legacy." MS. Morgan was well aware of this understanding and deliberately circumvented her parents' wishes. Judge Harris interrupted. "Mr. Bennett, are there any written agreements regarding this alleged arrangement?" "No, Your Honor, but family understandings don't always require formal documentation." The moral obligation. "This court deals in legal obligations, Mr. Bennett, not moral ones," Judge Harris cut in. "Please continue with any actual evidence supporting your client's claims." My father was called to testify next. Under Bennett's questioning, he painted himself as a devoted father who had always wanted the best for both his children. He claimed to have provided substantial financial support throughout my adult life, a blatant lie that made my jaw clench. He described his shock and hurt upon discovering I had secretly purchased the family home out from under them. "Alexandra has always been competitive with her brother," he stated, his voice carrying the authoritative tone he had used throughout my childhood. This was her way of asserting dominance and disrupting our family plans. During cross-examination, Melissa was methodical and precise. "Mr. Morgan, can you provide documentation of any financial support you've given Alexandra since she turned 19? "We provided her with plenty of opportunities." "That wasn't my question, sir. I'm asking about specific financial support, tuition payments, housing assistance, or direct monetary gifts." My father shifted uncomfortably. "We would have helped if she had asked properly." "So that's a no," Melissa clarified. "No documented financial support for the past 12 years. Yet you claim she used family funds to purchase the house. Can you explain this discrepancy?" By the time Melissa finished her cross-examination, my father's narrative was beginning to unravel. Judge Harris watched with an increasingly skeptical expression. My mother testified next, giving a tearful performance about family harmony and tradition. She claimed to have always treated Jason and me equally and expressed heartbreak over my betrayal. During cross-examination, Melissa gently but firmly pressed her on specific instances of unequal treatment. My mother's responses were vague and evasive, often defaulting to "that's just how we did things in our family." When it was my turn to testify, I approached the stand with steady steps despite my racing heart. After being sworn in, I faced the courtroom, avoiding direct eye contact with my parents. Melissa guided me through my testimony methodically. I described my childhood briefly but factually, without emotional embellishment. I detailed my financial journey from age 19 onward, explaining each job, my education path, and my savings strategy. I presented bank statements showing consistent deposits from legitimate employment and the gradual growth of my savings over 12 years. "Did you ever receive financial assistance from your parents during this time?" Melissa asked. "No," I stated clearly. After I moved out at 19, I was financially independent. My parents contributed nothing to my education, housing, or living expenses. "Were you aware of any family plan regarding the house you purchased?" "Absolutely not. I didn't even know it had been my grandparents' house until after I moved in and a neighbor mentioned its history. I found it through my real estate agent, made an offer, and purchased it through normal channels." During cross-examination, Lawrence Bennett tried to shake my testimony by suggesting I had always been jealous of my brother and purchased the house out of spite. I remained calm, referring back to the documentation and timeline that proved my house search had been conducted with no knowledge of the property's history. The most surprising testimony came when Melissa called Jason as a witness. My parents looked stunned as he walked to the stand, my father's face darkening with anger. Under oath, Jason confirmed that while our father had mentioned wanting to buy back our grandparents' house someday, there had never been concrete plans or funds set aside for this purpose. He testified to the pattern of favoritism throughout our childhood and the different standards our parents had set for us. "Alex worked for everything she has," Jason stated firmly. "Our parents provided me with extensive financial support throughout my life while expecting her to fend for herself. If anyone has a moral claim to independence and self-determination, it's my sister." By the time all testimony concluded, the atmosphere in the courtroom had shifted palpably. Judge Harris called for a 30-minute recess before delivering her ruling. As we waited in a small conference room, Melissa seemed cautiously optimistic. "The judge seems skeptical of your parents' claims," she noted. "They've presented no concrete evidence, just emotional appeals and vague assertions of family understanding." When court resumed, Judge Harris wasted no time in delivering her decision. "This court deals in facts and legal rights, not family traditions or verbal understandings," she began. "The plaintiff has failed to demonstrate any legal claim to the property in question. There is no evidence of financial contribution, written agreement, or legitimate expectation regarding the property," she continued, addressing my parents directly. "Mr. and Mrs. Morgan, while I sympathize with disappointment over family plans not coming to fruition, the court cannot enforce arrangements that exist only in expectation, not in law. Your daughter purchased this property legally with funds she earned independently. The court finds no basis for the relief you seek." With a final tap of her gavel, she dismissed the case. The relief that washed over me was momentary, quickly replaced by awareness of the family fallout that would follow. As we exited the courtroom, my father confronted me in the hallway, his face contorted with rage. "This isn't over, Alexandra," he said, his voice low but intense. "You've destroyed decades of planning for our family's future." My mother stood beside him, tears streaming down her face. "How could you do this to your brother?" she asked, seemingly oblivious to Jason standing right beside me. "She didn't do anything to me, Mom," Jason interjected. "This was never about me. It was about Dad's control." My father turned on Jason then, the mask of paternal concern completely gone. "You ungrateful boy. Everything I've done has been to secure your future, to build something lasting for you to carry on." "I never asked for that," Jason replied calmly. and I don't want a future built on treating my sister like she doesn't matter. As security officers began to take notice of the escalating confrontation, Melissa suggested we leave immediately. As we walked away, I heard my father's final shot. Don't either of you come crawling back when you realize you can't make it without this family. Jason and I exchanged glances. Both recognizing the irony, I had been making it without family support for 12 years, and now he was choosing to do the same. Outside the courthouse, standing in the bright afternoon sunlight, I felt a strange mixture of vindication and loss. I had won the legal battle and preserved my home, but the cost was the final severance of whatever tenuous family bonds had remained. "Are you okay?" Jason asked as we walked down the courthouse steps. "I think I will be," I replied honestly. This house was never about them. It's about the life I've built for myself. As Melissa drove us back to her office to complete some final paperwork, I gazed out the window at the city passing by. The house that had become the center of this family drama was waiting for me, not as a battlefield anymore, but as a sanctuary I had earned through years of determination and perseverance. The weeks following the court case were strangely quiet. The absence of family drama, which had been the background noise of my life for so long, left a silence that was both peaceful and unsettling. I threw myself into renovating my house, finding therapeutic value in stripping away old wallpaper and applying fresh paint, symbolic actions that mirrored my emotional journey. Zoe was my constant support, showing up on weekends with coffee and paintbrushes, never asking more of me than I could give emotionally. Jason called regularly, our adult relationship developing in ways it never could have under our parents' influence. He helped with some of the heavier renovation tasks, and during those hours of shared work, we began to heal decades of manufactured rivalry. "I always thought you hated me," he admitted one Saturday as we installed new kitchen cabinets. "Dad made it seem like you resented me for being the favorite." "I never hated you," I assured him. "I hated the situation. There's a difference." 3 months after the court case, the major renovations were complete enough to host a small housewarming party. Zoe helped me plan it, inviting colleagues from work, neighbors, and friends I'd made over the years. Jason came with his new girlfriend, a kind-hearted kindergarten teacher who seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. Standing in my living room, surrounded by people who chose to be in my life rather than those connected by obligation, I felt a sense of belonging I had never experienced in my parents' home. The house that had been at the center of so much conflict had transformed into a space of connection and peace. About 6 months after the court case, I received an unexpected call from my mother. We hadn't spoken since the courthouse confrontation, though she had sent a few text messages that I had acknowledged briefly but distantly. "I'd like to see you," she said, her voice tentative. "Just me. Your father doesn't know I'm calling." We agreed to meet at a neutral location, a cafe halfway between our homes. When I arrived, I barely recognized her. She looked smaller somehow, more fragile, as if the facade she had maintained all these years had finally cracked. "Your house looks lovely," she said after we ordered coffee. "I drove by last week." I nodded, unsure how to respond to this unexpected surveillance. "I want you to know," she continued, staring into her coffee cup rather than meeting my eyes, "that I grew up in that house. It was a happy home until my father died. After that, my mother struggled. When she passed, your father convinced me to sell it. I never wanted to." This revelation hung between us, another layer of control I hadn't known about. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. "Because I see myself in you, the self I might have been if I'd had your courage." She finally looked up, her eyes glistening. "I don't expect forgiveness, Alexandra. But I want you to know that I'm proud of the woman you've become, even though I did nothing to help you get there." This conversation marked the beginning of a cautious reconnection. Not a full reconciliation. Too much damage had been done for that, but a new relationship with carefully maintained boundaries. My father remained estranged, refusing any contact with either Jason or me. According to my mother, he had rewritten the narrative in his mind, casting himself as the victim of ungrateful children. As the one-year anniversary of homeownership approached, I reflected on how much had changed. Professionally, I had been promoted to senior architect at my firm, with my renovated home featured in a local design magazine, an achievement that brought unexpected validation. The publication led to opportunities to consult on historical home renovations, creating a satisfying side business. The house itself had become more than just a dwelling. I had transformed the garden into a peaceful retreat, hosting small gatherings for other young professionals navigating the challenging housing market. These informal mentoring sessions, especially for single women facing the same biases and challenges I had encountered, became a source of profound fulfillment. Jason had moved out of the luxury apartment our parents had subsidized and into a modest home he purchased himself. Our relationship continued to strengthen, free from the competitive dynamic our parents had fostered. We discovered shared interests and values that had been obscured by years of forced rivalry. The most significant change, however, was internal. The court case had forced me to confront and articulate the family dynamics that had shaped me. Working with a therapist specializing in family trauma, I began to recognize patterns of behavior I had internalized: the need to prove my worth through achievement, the habit of anticipating rejection, the difficulty in accepting help. Financial independence gave you freedom from their control, my therapist observed during one session. But true emotional freedom comes from understanding that your value was never tied to their approval in the first place. This insight resonated deeply. The house that had become a battleground now stood as a testament to my resilience. Each room I had renovated represented reclaiming a piece of myself that had been diminished or denied. One evening, as I sat on my front porch watching the sunset paint the neighborhood in golden hues, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. The grinding years of multiple jobs and tiny apartments. The courage to pursue a career I loved despite discouragement. The determination to save for something that seemed impossibly out of reach. The house around me was quiet, not the emptiness of isolation, but the peaceful stillness of sanctuary. On the porch railing sat the small plant Zoe had given me at my first closing, now thriving in a larger pot. Like me, it had needed only the right conditions to flourish. I understood now that family is defined not by blood but by actions, by who shows up, who supports your dreams, who sees your value without demanding you diminish yourself to fit their expectations. My chosen family, Zoe, supportive colleagues, new friends, and even Jason in his new role as an ally rather than a rival, had shown me what genuine connection feels like. The legal ownership of this house had been settled in court, but its true significance couldn't be captured in property deeds or bank statements. This home represented the life I had built through perseverance and determination. Each nail I had hammered, each wall I had painted, each garden bed I had planted was an act of self-definition. The battle for this house had ultimately been a battle for the right to determine my own story. Not the one my parents had tried to write for me, a supporting character in my brother's narrative, but the one I had always known I deserved, a story where I was the protagonist of my own life. As twilight deepened around me, I felt a profound sense of peace. The house behind me wasn't just a structure of wood and stone. It was the physical manifestation of a simple but powerful truth I had fought to claim. I matter. My dreams matter. My life matters. Not in relation to anyone else's expectations, but on its own terms. Have you ever had to fight for something that was rightfully yours? Or had to set boundaries with family who couldn't see your true worth? Share your stories in the comments below. Sometimes knowing we're not alone in these struggles is the most healing thing of all. Don't forget to like and subscribe if this story resonated with you. And hit that notification bell so you never miss another story of overcoming family drama and finding your own path. Thank you for listening to my journey. And remember, Sometimes the family we choose is more important than the one we're born into.